so this is our large classroom guillotine. It's used to cut stacks of paper, so you wouldn't use it to cut a single sheet or two sheets, but a stack of paper. And it has a number of different mechanics that I'm going to demonstrate for you right now. So we have a couple of safety rules. One is if you have any like dangly jewelry or scarves or necklaces, you're going to want to either remove them or make sure they're tucked away where they're not going to get caught up. When you're using this, it's a very sharp blade, so safety is key. So you want to be focused on what you're cutting. So we say no talking during any cutting activity. And another rule is one operator, two hands, and that just means that when it's time to actually cut, you want both of your hands on the handle that brings the blade down. So I'm going to demonstrate by cutting in half a stack of parent sheets of Mohawk paper, and this wheel right here adjusts the fence in the back. So my paper is 35 inches. I'm cutting it in half, so I'm going to set this to 17.5 inches. And there's a metal ruler, there's a ruler engraved into the bed of the press. So you kind of have to do some gymnastics to like peer back here if you're turning the wheel at the same time. Okay, so I've set my gauge to align with the mark at 17.5. I'm gonna take my stack of parent sheets and feed them under this clamp here until they make contact with the fence at the back, and also there's a fence on the side. So that forms a right angle, and I'm going to jog the stack both to the rear and to the side. So I want to make sure it's snug in that corner, and I kind of feel for that, but I'm also doing a visual test, and I'm just going to look and see that the paper is lined up. The next thing I want to do is protect my paper with some scrap, because the clamp comes down with a lot of pressure and it can leave an indentation. Similarly, the blade on the bottom can leave a little burr on the bottom sheets of paper. So we have a bin underneath, which is specifically for scraps for this purpose. So this is a nice, really ideal, kind of a heavier weight strip. These strips need to be, I think it's 2.5 inches so that they accommodate the full width of the clamp. So I'm just going to place this underneath the clamp, and then I'm going to also put one underneath the paper on the bottom. And to do that, I just kind of carefully lift the stack and slide it in underneath. And that can kind of jostle the paper and get it a little bit out of place, so I usually give it an extra reset jog. This red line here is like a rubber plastic stick that sits in, and the blade makes contact with that. It's a little narrow, so I usually give it a push with my finger on the end just to make sure that it's flush with this side. Once I'm happy, I will use this top wheel to bring down the clamp. Make sure that your fingers are well away from the bed at that point, and I just let it come to a natural resting point, and I'm going to give it an extra, I don't know, quarter turn or so. You want it really snug. Now I'm ready to make my cut. So depending on your height, strength, weight, all of those factors, you might have to develop your own style for cutting. For me, it helps to, since I'm not super tall, I have to give myself some extra height, so I usually jump, and I look pretty funny. So this is the funny part of the demo. So I'm going to bring it down. One operator, two hands on the blade, and so you see that very sharp blade just cut this right through, just like butter. I'm releasing the clamp now, just enough that I can slide my paper out. I've got these little offcuts of my packing material that I can recycle. And now I have a nice half sheet of Mohawk. This is still big enough to be used again, so I'll put that back down there. And again, I can keep this piece and I'll scrap this piece. And then there's one more feature of this machine that I want to show, which is if you're cutting something that's narrower, it's not a full wide parent sheet of paper. There is something in the back here called a split gauge, and there's a wing nut here that you can loosen by turning it to the left, and then this piece of the gauge slides back and forth. So you can set it to where you need it to be, and then just finger tighten the wing nut. You don't have to crank it down as hard as possible, just until it's tight. I'm not going to tighten it until I've set my measurement here. So the purpose of this is really, if you're cutting something skinny, you're using more the center of the blade, and sometimes you're even cutting something that's so narrow that it doesn't make contact with the main part of the gauge when you knock it up to the side. So it should be pretty intuitive when you need to use that. So you loosen it up, and I'm just going to trim. This is another thing to know, is that you can really trim a minute amount from these sheets. So I'm just going to do a really skinny little cut there, just to demonstrate that. And I'll tighten up this gauge now. And now I'm jogging it. In reality, I would probably use the standard sidewall there, but I'm going to do this just to show you how it works. Okay, so I've jogged it up. Again, I want to make sure to protect my paper. I'm just going to put scrap on top, scrap underneath. And I've done my clamp, 2 hands on the handle. Release that. I'm just going to kind of get that down like that. And you can see I just took off a really narrow little piece. You could go even smaller than that. So that's how the split gauge works. And that concludes the guillotine demonstration.